I stepped out of the limousine in my wedding dress, the crisp white fabric catching the light as camera flashes burst all around me. Reporters shouted my name while Daniel stood beside me in his black tuxedo, holding my hand with a calm confidence that made me feel untouchable. Just hours earlier, I had learned that my own parents had replaced my official wedding invitation with a corporate work trip flyer, hoping I would miss the ceremony entirely. They wanted me humiliated. Instead, I was arriving with the governor's family, my new in-laws, in full view of the press. I am Leah Carter, 28 years old, a nonprofit event coordinator who has spent most of her life trying to earn the approval of my parents, Margaret and Henry Carter. My fiancé is Daniel Brooks, 32, a policy advisor and the son of Governor Allen Brooks and Charlotte Brooks. The governor is a respected leader in our state, and his wife has been nothing but warm to me since the day we met. My younger brother, Ryan Carter, 24, has always been caught in the middle, trying to keep peace between me and our parents, but rarely speaking against them. As I looked over the crowd gathered at the entrance, I spotted Margaret standing near the parking lot, stiff-backed and scowling, while Henry stood beside her with his arms crossed. Ryan was there too, shifting awkwardly as if unsure which side he was supposed to be on. The cameras kept flashing, the questions kept coming, and I knew in that instant that the moment they had planned to be my humiliation was about to become the start of my victory. I grew up in a house where everything was decided for me before I even had a chance to form an opinion. My parents, Margaret and Henry Carter, ran our family like a corporation. My father was the quiet enforcer, rarely raising his voice but making his disapproval clear with a single look. My mother was the active force, the one who believed her standards were the only correct way to live. She had a habit of correcting everything I did, whether it was how I sat at the dinner table or how I spoke to relatives. It was not love in the way most people understand it. It was control disguised as guidance. By the time I was 18, I was desperate to escape. I moved to the city for college, believing distance would finally give me the freedom I craved. In many ways, it did. I built a life for myself, working as a nonprofit event coordinator, surrounding myself with people who valued me for who I was. I learned how to make decisions without calling home for approval, but every visit back to my parents' house reminded me that their expectations had not changed. They still saw me as someone who needed to be corrected and kept in line. I met Daniel Brooks 3 years ago at a charity gala. He had been helping to secure funding for an education program, and I was organizing the event. From the start, there was an ease between us. He listened when I spoke, not to respond with judgment, but to understand. He came from a very different world. His father, Governor Allen Brooks, had served 2 terms and was a respected figure in the state. His mother, Charlotte Brooks, was the kind of person who could make anyone feel at home within minutes of meeting them. The first time Daniel met my parents, I knew it would be difficult. Margaret greeted him with a thin smile, the kind she used when she had already decided she did not approve of someone. She asked him a series of pointed questions about his work and his family, each one framed as if she were interviewing a candidate for a job she did not intend to fill. Henry was less direct but no warmer. After Daniel left that night, my mother told me she did not trust men from political families. She claimed they only married for image and influence. Despite her disapproval, Daniel never pushed me to choose between him and my family. He believed time would change their opinion, that they would eventually see him for the person he was. I wanted to believe that too. So when we got engaged, I invited them to be part of the planning. I even asked my mother to help me choose the flowers, thinking that giving her a role might make her feel included. The months leading up to the wedding were a strange mix of joy and tension. On one hand, I was preparing to marry a man I loved deeply. On the other, I felt like I was navigating a minefield with my parents. They criticized almost every choice we made. The venue was too showy. The guest list was too political. Even the food was a problem. Margaret told me she would never serve salmon at a wedding because it was pretentious. I smiled through most of it, reminding myself that it was my day, not theirs. Then, a week before the wedding, my parents called to say they would not be attending. Margaret claimed a family emergency had come up, though she offered no details. The next day, I received an envelope in the mail from them. Inside was not an apology, not a letter explaining their absence, but a glossy flyer for a corporate seminar titled Efficiency in the Modern Workplace. The date printed on the flyer matched my wedding day. It took me a moment to process what I was looking at. My parents had replaced my wedding invitation with this as a way of telling me they thought my wedding was a waste of time. I felt my chest tighten as I stared at it. It was not just disrespect, it was intentional cruelty. My phone buzzed minutes later. It was my brother Ryan. His voice was low, almost guilty, as he said, "Leah, they are planning to make you look like you got left at the altar. They told some relatives you might not even show up." I sat there holding the phone, my anger and hurt mixing until I could barely separate one from the other. Ryan told me he did not agree with them, but he also admitted he did not know how to stand up to them. That night, I sat in my apartment with the flyer still on the table in front of me. Daniel noticed it and picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he realized what it was. "They sent you this instead of confirming they would come?" I nodded. He put it back down slowly and then looked at me with a kind of quiet certainty I had come to trust. "Leah, they can't stop this day from happening. They can't take it away from you unless you let them." The thing about Daniel is that he has a way of making chaos feel manageable. His words cut through my frustration and reminded me that I had a choice. I could let them humiliate me, or I could walk into my wedding with my head high and my life intact. Charlotte called me the next morning, her voice warm but firm. "We want you to ride with us in the limousine," she said. "We will make sure you arrive like the bride you are meant to be." The offer was more than just a ride. It was a statement that I was not alone, that I had a family willing to stand by me even when my own parents would not. I said yes, without hesitation. That decision was the first step in turning their attempt to humiliate me into a moment I would own completely. I did not know yet how perfectly it would all play out, but for the first time since I got that flyer, I felt ready to face them. The morning of the wedding was supposed to be filled with excitement, but instead I woke up with a knot in my stomach. The flyer from my parents was still tucked in my purse, and even though I had tried to push it from my mind, the insult lingered like a bruise I could not ignore. I had been warned by Ryan that they might show up just to watch me walk in without them, letting the guests and reporters think I had been abandoned. It was the kind of calculated humiliation Margaret would orchestrate. Quiet enough to be denied, but public enough to sting. The air was already buzzing with media coverage. Governor Brooks's office had released a statement confirming his son's wedding, and local news outlets had picked it up. Photographers were gathering outside the venue, hoping to catch a glimpse of the guests, and political reporters were circling for any moment they could turn into a headline. The thought of my parents using that attention against me made my chest tighten, but it also lit a fire in me. Daniel called early to check in. His voice was steady, warm. "We are leaving in 2 hours. The limo will swing by to get you. Are you ready?" I told him I was, even though inside part of me still wanted to confront my parents before the ceremony. But he reminded me of something important. "Leah, this day is not about them. It's about us. If they want to make a scene, let them. We will give them one they will never forget." Charlotte arrived at my apartment with a team of stylists from the Brooks estate. She walked in carrying a garment bag with my wedding dress and said, "Today you will look like the woman you are, not the girl they think they can control." There was something so grounding in her presence. As my hair was pinned and my makeup perfected, she talked about her own struggles with public image when she first married into the political world. People will try to decide who you are before you can tell them. The trick is to show up so undeniably yourself that they have no choice but to see you. I tried to focus on her words, but my phone kept lighting up with messages from people asking if my parents would be attending. Some were family members who had heard whispers about unresolved disagreements. Others were old friends who remembered how strict Margaret could be. I sent back polite, short replies refusing to feed the drama, but inside I was building my resolve. Ryan called once more. His voice was low, careful. "They're here," he said. "They parked far from the main entrance, but they are watching the cars pull up. Mom is in one of her pale blue suits. Dad's just standing there, arms crossed. I think they want to see how you react." I asked him where he was. "With them for now," he admitted, "but I'll come to you before the ceremony." The limo ride from the Brooks estate was a blur of polished wood, soft leather seats, and quiet conversation. Daniel sat beside me, his hand resting over mine, while Charlotte and the governor spoke about the guest list. Every few minutes I caught the glint of camera flashes through the tinted windows as we passed small clusters of people near the venue. It felt surreal, knowing my parents were somewhere nearby, waiting for a spectacle they had engineered. As we turned into the long driveway, I could see them. Margaret stood perfectly straight, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on the approaching limo. Henry's face was less controlled. His jaw was tight, his mouth set in a thin line. And then I saw Ryan, leaning slightly away from them, watching the limo approach with an expression that looked almost relieved. Inside the car, I felt my pulse quicken. This was the moment they had planned for me to arrive alone, looking small and isolated. Instead, I was stepping out with my future husband, his powerful and well-respected parents beside me, into a wall of camera flashes and curious voices. The image alone would undo their plan before I even took a step toward the doors. Daniel leaned close and whispered, "When you get out, hold your head high. Take your time. Let them take it all in." Charlotte added, "Smile, Leah. Not for them, but for you. This is your moment." The car rolled to a smooth stop. A valet opened the door, and Daniel stepped out first, turning to offer his hand. The sunlight caught the edge of my veil as I followed him, placing my hand in his. Photographers immediately called my name, the clicks of their cameras rapid and loud. Governor Brooks greeted a few of them by name, adding to the air of formality and importance. In my peripheral vision, I caught sight of Margaret and Henry still standing by the parking area. Margaret's mouth tightened further, her eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for an escape. Henry stayed rigid, his arms locked in front of him. Ryan looked directly at me and gave the smallest nod, one I returned without breaking my smile. The reporters shouted questions about the dress, the ceremony, the guest list. It was chaos, but it was my chaos, not theirs. I knew every camera lens pointed at me was capturing the opposite of what my parents had hoped. I was not abandoned. I was not humiliated. I was walking into my wedding surrounded by people who wanted me there. We moved toward the entrance, the sound of clicking cameras following us, each step heavier with the knowledge that my parents' plan was unraveling in real time. I did not look back at them again. I did not need to. The expression on their faces was already burned into my memory, and I knew they were beginning to realize this was not going to end the way they had imagined. The doors to the venue loomed ahead, tall and polished, reflecting the sunlight and the flashes of the cameras. Inside those doors was the life I had chosen, the people I had chosen, and the man I loved. Outside, in the distance, were the people who had raised me but had never truly accepted me for who I was. That contrast was sharper now than it had ever been. Charlotte was the first to step inside, her posture straight and regal, her arm looped with the governor's. Daniel and I followed, still holding hands. Each step felt like a declaration. This was not just an entrance. It was a statement that no amount of manipulation or cruelty could change the fact that I belonged here. Once inside, we were met with the hum of guests mingling, the soft music from the string quartet, and the warm scent of the floral arrangements I had chosen months earlier. The air felt different here. Calm, supportive, and untouched by the cold disapproval outside. The event staff moved efficiently, guiding us to a side room where I could compose myself before the ceremony. Charlotte closed the door behind us and turned to me with a quiet smile. "You did it. They cannot touch you now." Her words carried a weight I felt in my chest. This was the moment when the tide had fully turned. Daniel stayed close, his voice low but steady. "From here on, we focus on us. Let them do whatever they are going to do. It will only make them look worse." He brushed a hand over my shoulder, careful not to disturb the dress, and met my eyes with the kind of sincerity that made me believe him. The wedding coordinator entered the room with a clipboard, giving me a quick rundown of the schedule and confirming that the photographers would get official portraits before the ceremony. She also mentioned something unexpected. The local press had been granted a few minutes in the lobby to photograph arriving guests because of the governor's presence. That meant my parents had to either leave or risk being seen in whatever position they had chosen to take. I thought about that for a moment. This was not about forcing them into the spotlight. It was about showing without saying a word that their absence from my side was their choice, not mine. If they stayed hidden, the story would be that they were too ashamed or unwilling to be part of my day. If they came inside, they would be faced with the reality that I was walking into my marriage with dignity and joy, without them. Charlotte seemed to read my thoughts. They will have to decide very quickly how they want to be remembered in those photographs, she said. Ryan's knock on the door interrupted us. He stepped in quietly, glancing around before closing it behind him. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight as if he wanted to be anywhere but between two worlds. "They are still outside," he said. "Mom keeps looking toward the doors. Dad hasn't moved. I think they're hoping you will come to them." I shook my head. "I'm not going to them, Ryan. They made their choice." His shoulders slumped in relief, as if he had been worried I might still try to bridge the gap. "Good," he said softly, "because you look incredible, Leah. You need to walk in like this is exactly how you planned it." The photographers were ready within minutes. Daniel stood beside me for the formal shots, the governor and Charlotte flanking us, creating an image of unity that could not be mistaken for anything else. I could hear the faint clicks of cameras outside the closed doors and the murmurs of the press in the lobby. Each photograph taken here felt like one more layer of proof that I was not standing alone. When the time came to step back out into the lobby, I felt no hesitation. The Brooks family moved with practiced grace, smiling warmly at the guests and greeting the reporters as if it were second nature. I followed their lead, keeping my head high and my expression calm. The moment we emerged, the camera flashes intensified. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the far wall. Margaret had slipped inside but kept herself partly concealed behind one of the tall, potted trees that framed the entrance. She was angled just enough to see me, but still hidden from most of the room. Henry had not followed her in, choosing instead to remain outside. Ryan stood a few steps away from her, looking at me with a quiet encouragement I had not seen from him in years. I did not slow down. I did not look directly at her. I kept walking, speaking briefly to guests, and allowing the photographers to capture what they wanted. I knew the angles they were getting: me in my gown, Daniel beside me, the governor's family close, and somewhere in the blurred background, my mother trying not to be seen. It struck me in that moment that her attempt to stay hidden was doing more damage to her than anything I could have said. She was making herself the awkward detail in an otherwise perfect image. The coordinator signaled that it was time to move to the ceremony space. As we turned toward the aisle that would take us there, I felt a calm I had not experienced since the day began. The decision had been made. I had chosen not to engage in their game. I had chosen to stand exactly where I was meant to be, surrounded by people who valued me. Daniel gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "You ready?" I smiled at him. "More than ready." This was no longer about proving anything to my parents. This was about owning the day that was meant for me. Whatever they had planned had already failed, and I had not needed to raise my voice or chase them down to make it happen. All I had to do was walk forward. The music began to play, a soft swell from the quartet that filled the ceremony space with an almost cinematic energy. Guests rose from their seats as Daniel walked to the altar, with his father standing proudly beside him. I stood just outside the doorway, my arm linked with Charlotte's for the short walk to the start of the aisle. She was not just my escort. She was a symbol of the support I had gained, the family that had chosen me without conditions. The air in the room was warm with the scent of the flowers. I could see faces turning toward me, smiles breaking out, phones and cameras raising. This was the moment every bride imagines, the one meant to be about joy and celebration. But today, it carried an extra weight. This was also the moment my parents had been waiting to twist into humiliation, and I knew they were somewhere nearby, watching. The coordinator gave me a small nod, and I stepped forward into the aisle. The crowd's attention was on me immediately. Photographers stationed at the back began snapping photos, their flashes adding to the bright glow of the room. Daniel's eyes met mine from the altar, steady and sure, and everything around me seemed to sharpen. From my left, near the back, I caught sight of Ryan. He was standing in the last row, giving me a small, encouraging smile. Just behind him, half hidden in the shadows near a large decorative plant, was Margaret. She had come inside but had chosen a spot that kept her out of direct view. She was angled away from the guests, watching only me. Her pale blue suit stood out against the darker tones of the background. Henry was nowhere in sight, which meant he had likely stayed outside, unwilling to face the ceremony at all. As I continued walking, the photographers shifted their positions to capture the aisle from multiple angles. I knew exactly what they were getting. The images would show me in my gown, walking confidently toward the man I loved, surrounded by guests with the governor's family front and center. And in some of those frames, the blurred shape of my mother hiding in the background would be unavoidable. The ceremony began without delay. The officiant welcomed everyone, mentioning the significance of the day for both families. Daniel took my hands, and for a moment, the tension from earlier faded. His vows were simple and genuine, promising partnership and respect in every season of our lives. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart, looking at him, but aware that my voice carried to every corner of the room, including the one where my mother stood. I promised to choose him every day, to support him as he had supported me, and to build a life where love was never conditional. The words felt heavier than they might have on any other day, because they were also a quiet rejection of the way I had been raised. I was choosing something different, and I wanted every person there to hear it. The applause that followed our vows was genuine and loud. As the officiant pronounced us married, Daniel kissed me, and the cameras went off again in a flurry. The governor shook Daniel's hand and hugged me as if I had been part of the family for years. Charlotte kissed my cheek, her eyes bright with pride. We turned to walk back down the aisle as husband and wife, and the photographers followed our every step. Outside in the lobby, the press was waiting. They had been held back during the ceremony, but now had full access to capture the moments immediately after. As soon as we stepped into the light of the lobby, the camera flashes exploded again. It was in that chaos that the defining image of the day happened. A reporter, trying to frame a wide shot of us walking out toward the main doors, caught Margaret mid-step as she tried to duck behind one of the tall, potted trees near the entrance. The image was striking in its contrast. Me smiling in my gown beside Daniel, surrounded by the Brooks family, and in the blurred background, my mother partially hidden, her face caught in a look of panic as she realized she was in the frame. The press loved it. By the time the reception began, the photo was already circulating online. Headlines ranged from "Governor's son marries in elegant ceremony" to "Awkward moment as bride's mother hides from cameras." Some captions speculated about a family rift. Others simply called it an unusual wedding day moment. Whatever the angle, the narrative was clear. I had walked into my wedding with dignity and love, and my mother had chosen to hide from it. Ryan found me during the reception. He looked a little overwhelmed but relieved. "That photo is everywhere," he said. "Mom is furious, but she's not saying anything. Dad left before the reception even started." He hesitated before adding, "You looked happy, Leah. That's what matters." I thanked him for coming, for at least being there in some way, and he nodded, promising to stay in touch more often. It was a small step, but it felt like a beginning. As the evening went on, guests danced, laughed, and celebrated with us. Every so often, someone would mention the photo, shaking their head or chuckling about the irony of it all. I kept my focus on the people who had shown up for me, on the man who had stood by me without question, and on the knowledge that I had faced the worst my parents could throw at me and walked away with something better than revenge. I had walked away with my own life. By the time we returned from our honeymoon, the photo had taken on a life of its own. It had been picked up by larger media outlets outside our state, some using it as a quirky human interest piece, others framing it as a commentary on family tensions in high-profile weddings. The image of me stepping out with Daniel and the Brooks family, radiant and composed, while my mother hid awkwardly behind a decorative tree, had become the unplanned symbol of the day. I avoided reading too many of the comments, but friends sent me screenshots of strangers praising the way I carried myself. A few even shared their own stories of dealing with controlling or unsupportive relatives, saying the photo had reminded them they could still own their moments despite who tried to ruin them. It was strange to see my personal struggle turned into something other people found empowering, but it also felt like a validation of the choice I had made to walk forward without looking back. Ryan reached out more than he ever had before. He called once a week, sometimes just to ask how my day was, sometimes to share his own frustrations with our parents. He admitted that seeing them try to hurt me in such a calculated way had opened his eyes to how often they had done the same to him, though usually in smaller ways. It was the first time I felt like our relationship was growing on equal ground rather than through the filter of our parents' control. Margaret, however, refused to speak to me. I received one terse email from Henry that read, "The press twisted the situation. You should have asked them not to use that photo." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done, only an attempt to shift the blame. I did not respond. By then, I understood something important. Some people will never take responsibility because admitting the truth would mean facing the damage they have caused. Instead of chasing reconciliation, I focused on building the life I wanted with Daniel. We moved into a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, and for the first time, I felt like I was living without a constant shadow of judgment over my decisions. The Brooks family continued to treat me as one of their own, inviting me to dinners, including me in charity events, and supporting my work with the nonprofit. It was a kind of acceptance I had never experienced before, not because I had earned it by following their rules, but because they valued me exactly as I was. At one of the first post-wedding events I attended with them, a guest approached me to say they had been at the ceremony. They told me they had noticed how calm I looked despite what they called the tension in the air. I smiled politely, not giving away too much, but inside I felt proud. That calm had not been easy to find. It had been the result of years of learning that my worth was not tied to my parents' approval. The biggest shift came internally. For most of my life, I had been conditioned to think that love from my parents would always come with conditions, that it had to be earned by obedience, compliance, and silence. But the wedding day had forced me to see something clearly. Their love, if it could even be called that, was not the kind I wanted in my life. I no longer felt the same desperation to win them over. If they chose to come back into my life, it would have to be on terms that respected my boundaries. Daniel often reminded me that the wedding had shown both of us something valuable. "It was never about who showed up," he said one evening as we unpacked boxes in our new home. "It was about how you showed up for yourself." His words stayed with me. I realized that the real victory was not that the press had caught my mother hiding, but that I had refused to let her dictate my experience of one of the most important days of my life. Months later, the photo resurfaced briefly when a political blog used it in an article about public image management. The writer called it a case study in unintentional symbolism, pointing out how the background told a completely different story from the foreground. I kept a printed copy of that article, not to gloat, but as a reminder. It represented the moment I stopped being someone who reacted to my parents' control and became someone who acted on her own terms. Looking back now, I can see how easily the day could have gone another way. I could have confronted them in the parking lot, let my anger spill into the ceremony, or hidden away in embarrassment. That would have been the story they wanted, the one where I looked small and defeated. Instead, I chose to stand tall, to walk forward, and to let the truth of their absence speak for itself. When I tell this story to friends or colleagues, I always end with the same thought. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, undeniable refusal to be diminished. You do not always have to fight to prove someone wrong. Sometimes you just have to keep walking toward the life you want and let the world see you living it. That is what I did on my wedding day, and that is what I will keep doing for the rest of my life. That day taught me more than I ever expected. I learned that dignity is something you carry within yourself, no matter who tries to take it from you. I learned that standing tall does not always mean fighting. Sometimes it means refusing to bend. And I learned that the people who truly love you will show up without conditions. If my story resonated with you, if you have ever faced people who tried to dim your light, remember this. You are not defined by their actions. You are defined by how you choose to rise above them. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like it so more people can find it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. I would love to hear your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below, and if you want more powerful real-life stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next story.